Our next session is going to be an interesting session, fireside chat. Obviously, we had an election on Tuesday, lots of things to talk about. Here to talk about working with municipalities, legislative updates, both statewide and nationally. We have Bryan Barash, Vice President of External Affairs and Marketing for Dutchie. Kim James, Director of Cannabis Affairs for the City of Detroit. Hi, Kim. Good to come on up. Come on. Thank you. And State Senator Aric Nesbitt, Senate Republican leader of Michigan's 20th District. This session is sponsored by Plunkett Cooney and will be moderated by Jeff Schroder. Jeff, lots to talk about. I think we got 20 minutes to do it. Good luck, God bless, and God bless America.
Thank you, Derek. First of all, I want to thank Derek Dickow and Power Connections. This is the premier regional cannabis conference in the country. So I want to thank everybody for being here. So we don't have much time. This is like the presidential debate. There's a timer and there's a microphone cutoff. So we want to make the best use of our time. I want to start with Senator Nesbitt. First of all, Senator, thank you for joining us here today. We want to let our attendees know today, with respect to the two big statutes we have, the Michigan Medical Marijuana Facility Licensing Act, which was adopted by the legislature, and then MRTMA, which was adopted by the voters. What's the process of making legislative changes to these laws?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. Thanks for putting this together. I'm Aric Nesbitt. It's not a spelling error when you look at your papers. It is Aric with an A, A-R-I-C. There's a history on that. Middle of 5 kids all started with A's, and by the time Mom got to me, it was either going to be Aric or Erica with an A. So that's a little history in there. But I grew up in Southwest Michigan on a dairy and grape farm, so a little used to some agriculture that's out there, and been serving about a dozen years in the state legislature now. And I used to be the chair of the Regulatory Reform Committee in the Senate last term. And then in 15 and 16, I was the majority floor leader and worked on updating the medical marijuana laws at that time. And the challenge with having it passed the way it was in both the aughts and then in the teens, and the legislature not adopting them like they should have done, is that now any changes that are requires a 3/4 vote. So by Constitution, you got to get a bipartisan supermajority to be able to do updates or law changes to it in both the House and Senate. And so that creates a little bit of a challenge. As you can imagine, that there's quite a diversity of Republicans and Democrats on how they feel how regulated the product should be or shouldn't be. When I was chair of the Regulatory Reform Committee, which oversees a lot of licensing in the state, they oversee alcohol, gaming, lottery, kind of the fun committee is what I like to call it, along with cannabis and cigarettes, is that I took a look at trying to say, is there a way to kind of combine them together and try to combine that licensing to make it easier and more more timely in providing one agency. And that's something I'd still have an interest in having those conversations on, but there doesn't seem to be much push right now in the legislature on that.
How difficult would it be to get to a 3/4 vote of the legislature with a really good idea?
Try to create one set of statutes to deal with it all. And you see the challenge that you have between the municipalities, and you guys are both pretty keen in terms of experts on the municipalities.
For sure, and I will tell you, Senator, it's something we see all over the place. The first thing we tell states when they go recreational for the first time is don't make 2 separate tracks. Don't segregate the inventory. Don't make people have 2 different licenses, because it just creates a nightmare you're going to want to undo later.
Like the township I live in, they only allow medical, and so that's all that they have, and it's created a big challenge with those municipalities that allow the recreational, and you're seeing some empty buildings coming up because it's not as accessible.
So skipping a little bit from state to federal, Bryan, you wear a lot of hats, and what are the prospects for federal reform after this week's election based upon your experience?
Well, I appreciate that, and by way of introduction, I'm Bryan Barash from Dutchie, and we're the largest technology provider in the cannabis space, and We take our role in the industry very seriously, and we work up in Congress with some of the largest companies in the space and some of the companies here in Michigan as well, to try and bring cannabis reform policy to Congress. Obviously, we just had a pretty big election, and we're still evaluating what it's going to mean for cannabis reform. But I think, what we're focused on is we continue to see the march upwards, right, up and to the right of public support for cannabis reform. Majority of folks from all parties, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, support reform. For the first time in history, we had both major party presidential candidates supporting reform, and we now have a president-elect who explicitly supports reforms like the Safe Banking Act, moving the scheduling of cannabis, and the States' Rights Act. So it's a really exciting time. We think there's a lot of room for opportunity. The president-elect has said he's going to make progress here, and we hope to hold him to that and to see some really strong possibilities for progress in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Now a little bit from state to federal, back to local. We know that dealing with municipalities is one of the great joys of working in the cannabis industry. And the woman who needs no introduction to the cannabis industry in Michigan is Kim James. Want to talk about a local issue of importance to the city of Detroit, and to all municipalities and the state, which is, what is the city doing to deal with hemp-derived products being sold at retail outlets in the city that aren't licensed, such as gas stations?
Well, thank you for that question, Jeff. So by way of introduction, my name's Kim James, and hello, thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. And so, I'm Director of Licensing for the City of Detroit, which obviously is the largest city in the state. And we have one of the largest programs in the state. We have 50 retailers licensed so far. We have 70 with licenses, 50 open. Maybe about 30 or 40 growers, about 10 or 12 processors, so we're doing pretty well. And if you didn't know, Wayne County is grossing about $30 million a month, so we're probably the most, lucrative county in the state. Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. But anyway, along with that comes, because this industry kind of transitioned from, you call the gray market, and so there's, lots of shades of what people are, legality, what people are doing. And so one of the things that's happening, we see in the city, and it happens in urban areas around the country, is that there are these products made from hemp, not to badmouth hemp, because hemp is great. I think we should be making all kinds of products out of hemp, industrial, commercial, all those kinds of things. But what they are doing is making intoxicants from hemp and selling them. And children and kids are buying them, and there's no age restriction, and there's no indication of where they're tested. And it's kind of becoming a big problem around the nation and in our city. And so I know that there's a bill that's been proposed, or it's being worked on by the CRA and Representative Donovan McKinney from the State House. So that's going on, and we in the city are working on, we have a Detroit Police Department task force that is, investigating these stores when they see them. And then we're also working on an ordinance since the Farm Act, which allows hemp, is basically expired now. So we're not really preempted from doing anything to prohibit these items. And so we're preparing an ordinance just to add to the regulations, adding more regulation, adding an ordinance to prohibit those things from being sold in local stores unless they're going through the CRA. And then they would be sold at a licensed retailer.
So on that same topic, coming back in reverse order, Bryan, how do you see this intoxicating hemp conversation playing out federally?
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said, Kim. I think, we're seeing more and more municipalities and states trying to address this issue, and everyone's, doing their best. It's tough, as you said, with the what the Farm Bill created, and certainly I don't think Congress ever intended for passing industrial hemp to mean that you'd have kids in gas stations being able to buy unregulated, untested products. And Dutchie's been strongly in favor of having a safe and regulated market, and worries about what this means for for our industry and what it says about our opportunities for progress. So we've been very engaged on this issue, working with organizations like Attach at the federal level and with local organizations to try and make progress here. At the federal level, we have seen a number of opportunities for progress, including the Miller Amendment, which was an amendment that would take intoxicating products out of the definition of hemp, which we support. One of the problems is, even if you all, at the city level and at the state level, ban intoxicating products, you still can't prevent people from buying them from other states and shipping it in, right? And you could have kids having it delivered to their door. It's untested. I think we should all be very concerned about that. Certainly as a company, Dutchie is very concerned about that. And there are opportunities for progress. Biggest thing I'd say is we need everybody to get involved. This hurts our businesses, it hurts our bottom line, it makes us look bad. And the more voices we have that are raising that issue, that are making sure legislators at every level hear about it, that helps us make progress and hopefully close this loophole before it gets so big that it's sort of hard to unwind.
Senator Nesbitt, there's a big push in Michigan to regulate these hemp-derived products. There's a big push to make all sorts of legislative changes, and we know you're here tonight. And what advice would you give to the industry stakeholders to inform their elected officials on what changes are needed and how to educate them and push for progress?
Yeah, so first off, inviting me to events like this or other folks is important. Two, whether you're in retail, whether you're in grow, or whether you're in processing or testing, find out who represents that facility. Give them a call and say, hey, can we give you a tour, have a cup of coffee? I want to be a resource for you to answer those questions. But the way term limits has changed now in Michigan, before the term limits changed 2 years ago, House members 6 years in and then out. Senate, max of 8 years. Now there's a combined of 12 years, so there's going to be a little better steadiness, a little better opportunities to create some relationships in the State House. And it's amazing as I look around at my colleagues in my caucus, those that have been to facilities and have taken up the invite, the education level that they're saying, oh, this is not what we expected. This is actually a professionally operated, well-licensed facility. And then if there's an issue, if you have an issue with Cannabis Regulatory Agency, if you have an issue with Department of Treasury, if you have an issue with unemployment or Leo or Laura, you also have that relationship with that legislator for other business issues that are out there. And so I think that's just a lot of it is that initial thing is like, I don't want to lobby you on anything. I want to create that relationship. And you see that with networking in business all the time. But I would encourage you, as you look through the election results, go ahead and take a look at who's your local state House member, who's your local state Senate member, and then also reach out to your congressman, because if there are going to be reforms at the federal level, it's going to have to go through Congress. And there's some reforms that Donald Trump can do administratively at the end of the day, but a lot of this, especially if we get into bankability, it's going to have to be done through congressional level. And then sometimes you just figure out what it's attached to, and nobody's willing to say, oh, nope, like with the Farm Bill. It was with hemp. But at the end of the day, create those relationships, and then and be a resource. And also, they're having a local fundraiser. Don't be afraid to stop by. Donate whatever's there, and that's usually helpful to creating that little next level of connection that's out there.
So, Senator, with respect to inviting the local legislators to come to the facilities and visit, I'd like to just advise, I typically don't give legal advice in public, but free samples are permitted under the statute to visitors at the facilities. But which leads me to the next question about bipartisanship. What's the biggest obstacle to bipartisan support for these reforms? How do we bring the parties together other than maybe providing free samples and having everybody chill out?
I don't think, for a lot of my colleagues, I don't think samples will, maybe a few, but not many. And I did appreciate the time that it started at 4:20. I did notice that we got the best time slot out of the whole program. But I do think with members, as I look around, it's not just on cannabis, but I see it with liquor bills at times, or even gambling bills, that there's some members that just don't know just because of some moral objection. That's more on the right side. On the left side, you have some that don't want any regulations at all in this field like this. And so they're more into probably no regulations at all, and people shouldn't have to test, and it should just be sold however it should be sold. And so but then I think the vast majority of people in both the Republican camp and in the Republican camp, there's probably a few libertarian types in the Republican camp also on that, is saying, what does that best process, best practices on a market and regulatory level look like, so that it's safety, that the minors don't have access to it, that it's a safety level in terms of that we know what's in the product, that the advertising that's there, and that also it's a robust competitive market, both vertically and horizontally, to be able to sell and market the products here in Michigan. And a lot of that takes some time and patience with explaining that, but I do think there is a bipartisan majority that wants to make sure that the market works in Michigan. I mean, this is an amazing time, right? I mean, this is like the 1930s with alcohol in terms of prohibition. We went from a prohibited product to a legal product, and it's being legalized state by state. And people say, well, alcohol wasn't that way. Actually, the last state, if you ever watched Ken Burns' movie on Prohibition, I don't know if you guys have or not. It's kind of find it on streaming somewhere. It's worth a watch. The last state to legalize alcohol was Oklahoma in 1958.
Never been there.
So 25 years after Prohibition, and you still have some blue laws in different counties. But this is, again, there's a separate constitutional amendment that gives alcohol authority to the states. But the difference is now is that the states are taking the lead, and the federal government has to respond when you have dozens and dozens, a majority of the states, super majority of the states where it's accessible.
Speaking of prohibition and regulation, Director James, what is the city of Detroit doing to combat these illegal grow operations? I represent the city of Warren, and I have some city officials here, and they had a big illegal drug bust in a industrial facility last week, like just a huge amount of it, and it just blew my mind. And I shared that with you. So what's the city of Detroit doing? Because this is affecting the market.
It's a big problem for everyone. Well, just before we get to that, I just want to comment on what the senator just said, because I do agree with that. Our team, we go and visit just about every single facility in the city. We try to visit every single facility in the city of Detroit and try to get to know all of the licensees. A couple weeks ago, we took the deputy mayor with us, who is actually a police guy. And he was amazed. He was so amazed by what they were doing. He was really impressed, and it opened his mind to all of it. You know, he didn't understand what it meant before, and then when he kind of saw how they were operating and how clean it was and sterile, and he was just really impressed by it. And so it kind of went a long way in terms of him wanting to support them. Break-ins, okay, well, I did this at another thing. Let me see a show of hands. Who's here been broken into, if you're a licensee? Okay, only one a few. A few. Okay. So in the city, it's very challenging, and I don't know if this happens everywhere, but we've had things like people driving through buildings, taking a security guard hostage one time. Some stores get multiple break-ins. Sometimes it's inside job, security type person. And so we are still struggling with trying to figure out what to do. One thing we do have in the city, it's called the Green Light Program. I don't know if that's everywhere, but that's where their security cameras are tied into the police in real time, so they can kind of get there quicker. I don't know if that works. But we're still struggling with that as well. So I would love to know if anybody has anything that works. We've also asked for help from the state police, from the CRA to sort of weigh in or assist. And that was really kind of directed back to us to work with local police and not the state police. But to me, it seems like, in my opinion, it seems like the state would have a vested interest in tamping down illegal operations just because it's tax money that they're not getting if they leave them, it's diverting money away from taxpayers in the state. So I don't know why they're not interested, but it's been kind of challenging to get some help. So, anybody who has any input, I'd love to hear from you if you want to talk about it.
Well,
I don't have the answer.
Is, thank you, Kim.
Get more security.
So all I can say is, thank God Derek moved this from downtown Birmingham to Novi here, because the meter says we're overtime. But you haven't gotten a ticket yet, so.
Thank goodness
I don't know
I'm
if
not
that's
in
our
enforcement anymore.
cutoff signal here, but if we have more time, we're going to keep going. Okay, we're good to keep going here. Thank you for that. Bryan, one issue we really wanted to talk about was the rescheduling process. Cannabis is a Schedule I drug at the federal level. They've started to reschedule it. They were on a path. Now we had an election. There will be a change of administration. Where are we with this?
Yeah, happy to get into that. And I just first wanted to say we do appreciate all the efforts that the city of Detroit are making. Dutchie has a lot of folks who come from the industry that work with us to help dispensaries. And one of those is, as I was telling you earlier, Francine, who works for us in compliance, and she's also an operator in the city of Detroit. So we do appreciate and get a firsthand seat to those efforts. On the rescheduling front, Dutchie co-chairs the Coalition for Cannabis Scheduling Reform, which has been working hard at work on this issue, trying to make sure that that process is completed. We were disappointed that it was not able to be completed before this presidential election, but are very encouraged that both candidates and, of course, the president-elect were supportive of completing the process and moving cannabis from a Schedule I to a Schedule III drug. Just so y'all are oriented to what that means, a Schedule I drug means that it has no medical use and a high potential for abuse, which, as all of us in this room know, just is absolutely not the case for cannabis. We now have the FDA, for the first time, has said that they agree with us, that it does not have a high potential for abuse and that it clearly has a medical purpose. The DEA has now proposed a rule that would put that into place. We unfortunately had a little extra process along the way, so there is going to be an administrative law judge that holds a hearing on the rule, and that's going to happen in January or February. But we don't expect anything about the elections to change or slow down that process. We are appreciative of the president-elect's commitment to seeing that through, and as of now, our every expectation is that we will have a hearing in January or February and hopefully complete this process. For those of you who are operators, one of the most critical pieces to that is it means no longer paying the 280E tax, which of course is an unfair tax, makes you pay taxes far beyond ordinary business taxes, and there's no reason for you to be doing that. So we're hoping to get that process complete and start bringing relief to folks soon.
So I'll leave this one open to anyone who wants to answer it. We got one final question. For years we've talked about the combination of medical and adult use licenses in Michigan into one license type. What are we doing to prepare for that?
I mean, I guess I mentioned it when I guess half the room wasn't in the room, but it's something that when I chaired the Regulatory Reform Committee last term, it was something I was really trying to figure out where that landing spot is. And I was trying to engage some stakeholders on all different parts of the industry to seeing what it would take. Now, it would take a lot of political will, because you'd really have to, the way I look at it, and maybe you guys are a law degree. I went to business school instead of law school because I want to talk to my dad again. So no offense there, but end of the day, you're going to have to figure out a way to kind of repeal both of the laws and create one law. And then long term, by doing that, you could probably just need a simple majority to tweak and update the law going forward.
So you're talking about 3/4 vote to get there.
Yeah, 3/4 vote. And it's something where, how do you allow, especially with how some folks have built up their different business models, and then, I mean, it's kind of amazing, like there's no testing and quality, at least requirements for it. I'm sure a lot of people do on the medicinal side, but on the recreational side, there's a whole set of laws on it all that's there. And then there's the tax issue. And so I would think that it's like you could get going through to one license, allowing some continue to have municipality control. I think we saw a few years what it's like when you try to push out some of the caregiver worlds. I do think there needs to be some reforms in the caregiver world, but I think that starts a little bigger conversation at the end of the day. That I'm more of a individual rights guy, and I get the fact that you should be able to raise and grow some of your own stuff. I grew up on a dairy farm, and I grew up with non-pasteurized, non-homogenized milk that you can't buy at a grocery store, but you can, at home. And so
is that the stuff RFK Jr.'s pushing?
Yep.
Okay.
That Bobby Kennedy has been. It's going to be some interesting. I think kind of excited over the next 4 years. There's going to be some very aggressive and interesting reforms and trying to take on the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., which will be interesting. But in terms of Michigan, the laws that are there, that there's going to be some big challenges and a lot of trust that will have to be built up to get it done.
I'll say this: y'all have some. You guys have the hard part. It's easy for us. We've got a button for that. But the reality is, the good news is you guys have a lot of models now for how to do this right. There's a number of states that have combined their licenses, have done a lot of work to combine their laws, a number of different models for it to look at and see what's worked. So I would just say, use us as a resource, use other companies who are in multiple states as a resource, your fellow regulators through organizations like CANRA, and hopefully that can help you guys find a consensus solution.
Director James?
Thank you. Well, the House has already introduced a bill. I think it's 5884, I think. And so I read it, and I think, I think it's a good idea to streamline things. I think it'll be great. In Detroit, we don't have too many medical. There's only maybe 3 that don't have adult use as well. So it doesn't seem like it will hurt them too much. But the issue I noticed with the bill that was seemed to be neglected was patients. And what happens to patients between 18 and 21 doesn't seem to be accounted for. What happens to the discount tax that they get? That seems to be gone. And so I would think that on the medical side, there might be some lobbying that would need to be done in order to preserve those privileges that are already there. So we'll see what happens. But I think it's in what happens after the committee. I think that's where it is.
Right. Great. I think I see the meter maid coming. We're going to have to...
okay.
But before I forget, I forgot to say one thing.
You'll pay the ticket.
Which is, we do need y'all to get involved at the state level, at the federal level, at the local level. As the senator said, contacting your regulators. As an industry, we need to be pooling our resources together through federal organizations, through your state organization. If we all work together, I know we can get policy reform across the finish line. So
just
get involved.
Just a quick thing, a little anecdote that when I first got elected to office, my mentor told me you can be an inch deep and a mile wide on so many issues. You got to remember legislators are dealing with things from agriculture, insurance, education, higher education, healthcare, a $70-some billion budget. Like, you just keep going through corrections issues, Department of Agriculture issues. Like, in the end of the day, we look at folks that know the industry, understand it, are patient, and can help and can be looked at as experts. And we each, within our caucuses, look at folks who also develop expertise in different areas. And so creating that relationship, I know when I'm talking healthcare, there's a doctor in my area that I call, or there's a respiratory therapist that I call. When I'm talking insurance, I know there's a few insurance folks that I can call. And so that's always important for us, that we know somebody has their cell phone, a bill's coming up, there's 1,001 things on the agenda, who can I call to bounce something off from? And I do want to say, Derek, thank you for hosting these and creating a good network around. This is I think it's important for kind of an infant, industry that's kind of going to teenage years, it seems like. Not quite completely of legal age yet, but getting close to it. but it's important that you guys are talking to each other to be able to figure out what that regulatory and legislative best practices are to help this industry be safe, effective, and legal.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, everyone on the panel. Thank you, Power Connections and Derek and your entire staff and team. It's been great working with you. So we'll all be here. Thank you.